Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are really getting into something fascinating, the social history of India. Specifically, we're going to challenge some of the standard narratives you might find in like textbooks and, the common understanding of things.
Yeah.
So to do that, we're going to be using a couple of sources, excerpts from a YouTube video of a book talk on a Dharmic social history of India and information about the book itself.
Right.
So we'll link that in the show notes for you.
Great.
But this is
It's a really interesting book.
a really complex topic, and I think we're going to be able to get into some stuff that is a little bit misunderstood often.
Absolutely.
And this is going beyond just like dates and kings. This is about like
social history.
the social history, like how society functioned and evolved and all that.
Exactly.
And was shaped by concepts like dharma and yajna and bhakti and all of that good stuff.
All intertwined.
Yeah. So we're going to get into some surprising insights, I think. Like, did you know that that this book explores the idea that Buddhism, which is often seen as a liberating force, actually might have contributed to the development of untouchability?
It's a very provocative argument.
Yeah.
It really makes you think about the complexities of history and how these things play out over time.
So are you ready to challenge some assumptions?
Absolutely.
I am.
Let's do it.
Let's get into it.
Let's start with this the standard model of Indian history that the author Aravindan Neelakandan challenges. And you've probably heard of the Aryan invasion theory, which plays a significant role in this model.
Yeah.
Suggesting that an external group, the Aryans, invaded India and imposed their social structures, including the caste system, on the indigenous population.
Okay, so that's the typical narrative that we've all kind of...
Yeah, the standard model.
And what does this book have to say about it?
So Neelakandan argues that fixating on ethnicity like the Aryan invasion theory does really misses the point. He suggests that social hierarchies based on birth were not unique to India. Similar systems existed in many pre-modern societies globally. You might be surprised to learn that even in Europe, there were deeply ingrained social divisions with concepts akin to untouchability.
Okay, so the caste system, often seen as this like uniquely Indian phenomenon, might not be so unique after all.
Yeah.
That's a thought-provoking idea.
It really is.
Wow.
It really is. And he's encouraging us to look beyond these invasion narratives and really explore the internal dynamics of Indian society. And understand that India also had strong forces for social emancipation rooted in its own traditions, particularly through its spiritual and philosophical frameworks.
So if those hierarchies weren't unique to India, does that mean that the Aryan invasion theory is not the whole story?
That's one of the key takeaways here.
Okay. That makes me think about the Harappan civilization.
Yes.
One of the earliest urban civilizations in the world.
Absolutely.
Do they have social structures that might have like continued into later periods of Indian history?
That's a question that Neelakandan delves into. And he presents evidence suggesting that the Harappans might have had a system similar to the Jajmani system, a traditional system of reciprocal services in Indian villages.
Can you explain the Jajmani system a little more? I'm not familiar with that.
Sure. So imagine a village where different occupational groups, like farmers, blacksmiths, barbers, depended on each other for goods and services. This interdependence was formalized in this Jajmani system, which ensured a stable social and economic order. And Neelakandan suggests that this system, with its emphasis on interdependence and obligation, might have existed in the Harappan civilization and continued into later periods.
So there's like a possibility of continuity in social structures from the Harappan civilization to later periods in India.
Yeah.
It's amazing how archaeology can reveal these connections
Yeah.
to the distant past.
It's a fascinating area of research. And Neelakandan also points to the presence of fire rituals, or yajna, at Harappan sites, which are central to Vedic traditions.
Right.
This potential continuity challenges the idea that everything changed dramatically with supposed Aryan invasion.
Yeah, it sounds like we're already starting to see the standard model crumble a bit.
A little bit.
Now let's talk about the Vedic period, often considered like the foundation of Hinduism.
Right.
Does this book argue that Vedic society was like a utopia, a perfect embodiment of Dharma?
Not quite. Neelakandan distinguishes between Vedic values and the actual Vedic society. He emphasizes that Vedic society, like any human society, had its complexities,
Right.
while Vedic texts emphasize principles of Dharma, like righteousness and social harmony. The reality on the ground was more nuanced, and he gives the story of Rishi Kakshava, a sage who was expelled from a Vedic ritual because of his birth. His mother had worked as a servant, and he was considered unsuitable to participate.
Oh, wow. So even in a society that, like, championed those certain values, the reality could be different. Does the author offer any insights into why that disconnect existed?
He doesn't delve too deep into the reasons for this disconnect, but mainly highlights this example to demonstrate that Vedic society wasn't a utopia free from social tensions and exclusionary practices.
Okay, so Vedic society had its flaws.
Oh.
But how did Vedic values themselves address issues like social exclusion?
That's where it gets interesting. Neelakandan argues that Vedic values like compassion, the pursuit of knowledge, and selfless service, as embodied in the concept of yajna, offered a counter-narrative to social rigidity and hierarchy. He suggests that these values provided a foundation for social change and reform throughout Indian history.
So even though social hierarchies existed, there were elements within the Vedic tradition that pushed for greater inclusivity and justice.
Exactly.
Okay.
The complex interplay of ideas and societal practices.
Yeah. This makes me think about Buddhism, which arose in India during this period.
Right.
And is often seen as like a reaction against the hierarchical nature of the Vedic system.
Right.
Does Neelakandan agree with this view?
That's where we encounter one of the most provocative arguments in the book. Neelakandan challenges the common narrative of Buddhism as a purely liberating force. He suggests that Buddhism, while advocating for certain forms of equality, might have contributed to the development of untouchability in some ways.
Wait, how is that possible?
Yeah.
Buddhism emphasizes compassion and the equality of all beings.
Yeah.
How could it have anything to do with untouchability?
It's a complex argument. Neelakandan highlights how Buddha himself categorized people based on their capacity for spiritual growth, with those in certain occupations often seen as less pure, viewed as having less potential. This categorization, he argues, created a hierarchy within Buddhist thought, which might have had these unintended social consequences.
So even within a tradition that preached equality, there were these underlying hierarchies.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
And he also points to the existence of Bodhi slaves, people given as slaves to Buddhist monasteries, often by kings after conquests.
Bodhi slaves.
Yeah.
I've never even heard that term before.
It's not a term that's widely known.
Yeah.
But these individuals and their descendants remained in a state of servitude confined to specific tasks and were considered untouchable.
Wow, that really challenges my understanding of Buddhist history.
Yeah, it's a reminder that there's a lot more nuance to these historical narratives than we often realize.
Okay. To further illustrate this point, Neelakandan brings in the observations of the Chinese traveler Fahian, who visited India in the 5th century CE.
Okay.
Fahian, a devout Buddhist, documented the practice of untouchability in Madurai, a city in South India. Now, here's the thing. He didn't condemn it.
He didn't.
No, he saw it through the lens of Buddhist principles like ahimsa or nonviolence.
Oh, so he saw this practice as somehow aligned with Buddhist teachings.
That was his interpretation.
Wow.
And it's a reminder that even those who advocate for equality can sometimes perpetuate existing social hierarchies, often unintentionally.
Yeah. That's so thought-provoking.
It is.
It makes you question these simple categorizations of like good and bad in history.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we discussed the standard model, the complexities of the Vedic period, and the surprising perspective on Buddhism. Where does the Bhakti movement fit into all of this? It's often seen as like a force for social change and a challenge to like Brahmanical authority. Right, that's the common understanding. But Neelakandan offers a different perspective. He argues that the Bhakti movement, while advocating for social equality, is deeply rooted in Vedic tradition, specifically the concept of yajna, selfless service or offering.
Okay, so instead of a complete break from the Vedic system, it was more of a reinterpretation or a evolution of its core ideas.
That's a great way to put it. Neelakandan highlights how bhakti, with its emphasis on devotion and love for the divine, can be seen as a form of yajna, a selfless offering of oneself to a higher purpose. And this concept transcended social hierarchies, emphasizing the inherent equality of all beings in the eyes of the divine.
So it's interesting how a spiritual concept like bhakti could have such a profound social impact.
Absolutely.
Could you give us some examples of this?
Sure. Think of figures like Kabir Ravidas and Mehra, all prominent figures in the bhakti movement. They use their poetry and songs to challenge social norms, advocate for the equality of all, and promote this idea of a direct connection with the divine regardless of caste or social status. Their devotional practices became a form of social activism, undermining rigid hierarchies and fostering a sense of unity.
Wow, so they use their art as a tool for social change.
Exactly. It speaks to the power of bhakti as a force for social transformation throughout Indian history.
Yeah. Okay, so we've seen how bhakti played a role in shaping Indian society. But how does Neelakandan connect these historical insights to the present?
He brings us into the 20th century with the example of the movie Tangalan.
Okay.
The film portrays the emancipation of Dalits in the Kolar Gold Fields, attributing this social change primarily to Buddhism. However, Neelakandan argues that this narrative is incomplete and overlooks the contributions of individuals like Madapaathi.
And who is Madapaathi?
He was a leader of the Dalit community in Kolar, a devout Hindu who dedicated his life to improving the lives of his people. He established schools, advocated for their rights, and worked tirelessly for their upliftment, all grounded in the principles of Vedic Dharma.
So it sounds like a case of a forgotten hero, whose contributions rooted in Hindu principles have been overshadowed by a different narrative.
Exactly.
Well,
Neelakandan uses this example to highlight a larger point about the need for what he calls a Hindu social science.
Hindu social science.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. He's calling for a reassessment of how we understand Indian history and society. Neelakandan argues that dominant narratives, even those claiming to challenge colonial perspectives, often rely on frameworks and assumptions rooted in Western thought. He suggests that a Hindu social science would allow us to understand the complexities of Indian society in a more authentic and nuanced way, free from biases and distortions that have often shaped our understanding.
So it's about reclaiming our own intellectual heritage and using it to interpret our past and present.
That's a powerful way to put it.
Yeah.
It's about decolonizing our understanding of India's social history, recognizing the richness and depth of its own intellectual traditions.
This has been an incredible journey. We've challenged the standard model, uncovered hidden narratives, and explored the profound impact of concepts like Dharma Yajna and Bhakti. What does Neelakandan see as the ultimate significance of all of this?
That's what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive. We'll connect these historical insights to the challenges we face today and explore how the principles embedded in India's social history can guide us towards a more just and equitable future.
All right, so welcome back to the deep dive. The final part of our deep dive into a Dharmic social history of India. We've covered a lot of ground, challenging the standard model, uncovering these hidden narratives, exploring Dharma Yajna Bhakti, all this good stuff.
Yeah.
But now I kind of want to connect these historical insights to the present. Like, why should we care about all this stuff?
Right.
These ancient concepts, these historical debates.
It's a good question.
Like, in today's world, why does it matter?
Yeah. And Neelakandan argues that understanding the true nature of Indian social history, with its inherent dynamism and capacity for self-renewal, is actually essential for addressing the challenges we face today.
So it's like,
Yeah.
we're not just looking at the past for the sake of the past.
No.
It's about learning from the past.
Exactly.
To, build a better future.
Right.
So what specific lessons does he highlight?
Well, he emphasizes the principles of Dharma, the spirit of Yajna, and the transformative power of Bhakti as valuable tools for creating a more just, equitable, and harmonious society.
Okay, so these concepts that are often viewed as purely religious
Right.
actually have deep social implications.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that a little bit?
Sure.
How do Dharma and Yajna and Bhakti translate into action in the real world?
Well, let's start with Dharma. It's often translated as duty or righteousness. But it's a much broader concept. It encompasses ethical conduct, social responsibility, living in accordance with one's true nature. Neelakandan sees Dharma as a guiding principle for individual and collective action, a framework for creating a just and sustainable society.
So it's not just about personal piety.
Yeah.
It's about how we engage with the world around us.
Exactly.
Okay.
Then there's Yajna, often associated with these fire rituals, but representing this deeper idea of selfless service and offering. And Neelakandan argues that this spirit of Yajna, of contributing to the well-being of others and the larger community, is essential for social progress.
So recognizing our interconnectedness.
Yes.
And working towards the common good.
Precisely.
Okay.
And finally, we have Bhakti, the path of devotion and love. And as we discussed earlier, Bhakti has been this powerful force for social change throughout Indian history, challenging hierarchies and promoting equality. And Neelakandan believes that this transformative power of Bhakti, of connecting with something larger than ourselves and recognizing the divinity within all beings, is crucial for building a more compassionate and inclusive world.
So like these concepts offer like a framework for addressing some of the most pressing issues we face today, like social inequality, environmental degradation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the key takeaway here. Neelakandan's book isn't just a historical analysis, it's a call to action. He's inviting us to rediscover and revitalize these ancient principles and apply them to the challenges of our time.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with this thought, like, knowing what we know now, how can we, like, as individuals, better understand and address these social issues? Drawing upon these principles of Dharma, Yajna, Bhakti feels like a big question, but also like a really hopeful one.
It is a big question, and it's a question for each of us to ponder and to act upon. It's about recognizing the wisdom embedded in our own traditions and applying it to create positive change in our communities and the world at large.
Well said. And for those of you who want to explore these ideas further, I highly recommend checking out the book, A Dharmic Social History of India by Aravindan Neelakandan. Yeah, it's been an incredible journey exploring this book with you.
It has. It's a book that challenges us to think critically, to question assumptions, and to really engage with our own history in a meaningful way.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.